Welcome back, Energy Physio. Finishing up this little piece on how does strength and conditioning fit into our rehab model. And we also talked about what that looks like from an injury standpoint of how we challenge load just beyond an athlete's capacity to bring those levels up at the same time to really reduce our risk of re-injuring once we return to sport. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we challenge an athlete in a way that makes sense coming off of an injury or some type of pain that's limited their functional activity. So this is how we're going to challenge the load, especially considering like a return to sport. Now, return to sport's different for a lot of people. This is kind of my catch-all for the active adult. Return to sport could be gardening, or it could be Olympic lifting, it could be soccer, basketball, baseball, volleyball, whatever the case may be. But the idea is to return this person to the highest level that they want to be at based on their goals. And if we're going to do this right, we got to look at a couple different types of demand in a way that we can move an athlete through these demands in a way that challenges them a little more in each different category. And so here's the types of demands we're looking at. And we're still functioning under this idea of load versus capacity. And it's how can we consistently change the load to challenge our capacity in a way that the athlete grows and becomes more resilient as a functional mover. So the first one we want to introduce is a true load, all right? True load is literally adding weight. Can somebody air squat and hit all their points of performance? Now can we challenge that with 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, and can they still hit all the points of performance that we want to see? In other words, is their technique unchanged by adding weight to the system? If an athlete, we can challenge them up to a certain load and make their tissues very resilient. And that's the idea. Adding true load increases tissue resiliency, which makes the tissue less susceptible to injury, especially while maintaining good form while you do it. So now the next thing is we want to add in a metabolic demand or a metabolic load. And what this is, whereas this is true load like weight, this is a cardio load or a respiratory load. And so when we say metabolic demand, we're talking about the cardiorespiratory system. And what that looks like is, can this athlete get their heart rate really high and be breathing hard and still hit a squat and maintain good technique and form? So over here, we're talking about weight and form. Can we challenge the form with increased load on the system? So like an air squat, now we're doing a back squat with 135. Metabolic demand, on the other hand, is now, can we get heart rate up? Can we get respiratory rate up? And then can we still hit a true load demand, an increased load, and still maintain our good form? So, whereas this is just adding weight, here can we run 400 meters and then hit this same weight and maintain great form? Because what we know is that when the heart rate gets jacked up and the respiratory rate gets jacked up, all of a sudden it's much more difficult to control our movements because we're fatigued. The reason for that is now we've added two loads into the system. So when we're thinking about this in terms of demands on the body, true load is a load in itself, and then a metabolic demand is a cardiorespiratory load. So now the body is having to manage two different kinds of loads and still maintain good technique, good form. The next type that we're going to challenge, so if somebody's very proficient at true load, very proficient at challenging movement under cardiorespiratory stress and still being able to hit points of performance under load, now we're going to challenge this athlete with speed, which can be a couple of different things. It can either be doing something faster. Can this person do this back squat at whatever weight at a rate of speed that's much faster, and can they still maintain good form? Also, can we introduce movements that require speed? Something like power snatch, where the athlete has to generate speed from the floor, take a weight all the way from the floor to overhead, move from one stable position, lose complete connection with the ground, and then get back in another completely stable position by adding a movement in with speed. And so now what we're looking at is not only a true load, but doing something fast enough that requires the heart rate and respiratory rate to elevate as well. But now can they move fast through more unstable movements and maintain good form? And this is why we want to add this in last. A speed load is a neurological load. This challenges the nervous system in a way where we can really start to dissect, can you maintain good form when we've challenged your neuromuscular system at the highest level? And so this is a neuro load. Remember, this is a cardiorespiratory load, true load. The thing about speed is it's not only a neurological load, but it's also a metabolic load and a true load all in one. And so what we see is this is a nice progression in the strength and conditioning world to take our athletes back to sport, because we take them out of that I3 model, resolving their incomplete mechanics, and then we put them on movements where they can maintain good, stable movements with great form. Now we can challenge that with weight. Can we make them stronger? Can we make their tissues more resilient? So when we jump in, we start to increase heart rate and respiratory rate. Their tissues are resilient enough to handle it, but also can they maintain good technique while they do it? Then lastly, if we're proficient at this, we can start to interject speed into the equation, which challenges the neurological system with the neuro load. It challenges the heart rate and respiratory system as well, and we're still using true load. This can even apply to things like running, where we're not necessarily thinking of running as having a true load like we're going to put weights on our back, but running load would be considered distance. Can you run a certain distance and develop tissue resiliency throughout that distance? After you do that, now can we run a little faster and get the heart rate up with something like a fartlek, where you're changing your speeds, variable speed? Can we get the heart rate and respiratory rate back up and maintain good form, and then come back down and still maintain good form? Lastly, when we talk about speed like a sprint, so sprint adds in more true load, because the force when running is 9 times through a single leg when you run. And so as you increase speed, the force increases through the leg. Also gets the heart rate and respiratory rate up faster, challenges the neuromuscular system in a way that does form start to break down when we're going as fast as we possibly can. Do the ankles collapse in? Does the knee internally rotate and go into a valgus position? Do the hips internally rotate? Does the spine go into extension? What's it look like when we're sprinting versus a slow jog over 6 miles? And so this is how we're thinking about, in strength and conditioning, how we're going to challenge our athletes in a way that is very progressive and takes them back to the highest level of movement proficiency, so we can send those people back out onto the field or whatever their goal is without risk of re-injury. See you later.